A Doberman puppy was seen carrying a shoe in its mouth, but it wasn't random. It wasn't stealing for fun. It was collecting them deliberately. When my wife Eleanor and I replayed the security footage, we saw it move like a shadow. Quiet, cautious, stepping onto the porch, picking up the shoe, and vanishing into the mist beyond our yard. Why would a stray puppy take a shoe? The next morning, we decided to follow those tiny prints just to see where they led. And from the fog between the trees, the thief returned small calm, and once again holding something in its mouth. This time, it wasn't my shoe. It was a little blue child's shoe. We didn't know it yet, but what we were about to discover would forever change how we saw life, love, and even ourselves. The story began with nothing remarkable. Just one of those small mysteries that sneak into the quiet routines of old age. I adjusted my wireframe glasses and glanced out at the porch. Something was off, familiar, yet strangely wrong. One of my sneakers was gone. The other remained by the doormat, sitting there like a lonely sentry witness to a midnight disappearance. Dew still clung to the fabric, glinting in the first light of morning, beautiful, almost mocking. I chuckled, a low, rough sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. My first thought was Buster, the neighbor's golden retriever, a notorious kleptomaniac with a passion for anything not nailed down. Eleanor. I called out through the screen door, my voice echoing through the kitchen that smelled of morning coffee. "You're not going to believe this, Buster's at it again." She stepped out, hands dusted with flour, her silver hair catching the sunlight like a faint halo. She looked down at the single shoe, smiled softly, and said, "That rascal, I told you to keep them inside." I frowned, "But there's no slobber. If Buster took it, there'd be a trail." Eleanor shrugged. Maybe someone else carried it off. I bent down, my bare feet touching the cool painted wood. 35 years in carpentry had taught me that everything should have its place, its order. So when something small went missing, it didn't feel like chance. It felt like a rule of the world had been broken. I searched around the porch, brushed through the grass, lifted a few boards, and even checked under the stairs. Nothing except for a few faint, muddy prints leading toward the edge of the yard. Small, round, shallow, and trembling almost like the steps of something fragile. I knelt down, squinting. Not human, not cat. Too small for an adult dog, yet perfectly shaped, each pad distinct like the feet of something scared but determined. When I stood and followed the direction they pointed, I saw the fog thickening between the pines behind our house, swallowing the morning sun. A strange feeling crept through me. Curiosity, unease, and something softer I couldn't name. Eleanor was still at the doorway, arms folded, eyes steady and kind. "If it wasn't Buster," she said quietly, "then who was it, Jack?" I looked down at the lone shoe on the porch and gave a small, tired smile. "I don't know, Eleanor," I said, "but I intend to find out." Back then, I had no idea that one missing shoe on an ordinary morning would lead me to the most unexpected meeting of my life with a small, trembling creature who hadn't even grown up yet, but already knew how to love like a mother. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, washing our little wooden kitchen in gold. The coffee maker clicked softly, its warmth blending with the smell of toasted bread. Eleanor was arranging wild daisies in a clear glass vase while I sat at the table pretending to read the newspaper but not taking in a single word. On the floor, by the door, the remaining shoe still lay there, quiet, damp with dew, a silent witness to something that had disturbed the calm order of our morning. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading across my tongue. "What would you say I asked if I told you I'm going to check the camera from last night?" Eleanor looked up, a faint smile rippling across her face. "For one missing shoe," I nodded. "I don't like questions without answers." She laughed softly, warm, plain, and familiar. 30 years in carpentry, and you still can't stand things out of place. I chuckled too, but something restless stirred in me. A missing shoe shouldn't matter. But it did. Something about it tugged at me, like this wasn't just about a misplaced thing, but about something deeper that had quietly gone missing too. I stepped into the small room where our old security monitor sat. The screen was grainy, the footage trembling with the static of time. I rewound to 4:30 a.m. Nothing but fog. At 45, a branch swayed. 4:52. I held my breath. A small figure appeared in the corner of the screen, moving as softly as breath itself. I slowed the playback, gripping the mouse tighter. Under the dim porch light, a puppy stepped into view. Not Buster, the neighbor's dog, not anyone's dog. A tiny Doberman, maybe 3-4 months old, thin, trembling its black and tan fur matted with mud. It moved carefully, hesitantly, as if even the sound of its own steps might betray it. Then it lowered its head, sniffed the shoe, and gently licked the toe. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't curiosity. It was tenderness. Then, with a delicate motion, it lifted the shoe by its front teeth and disappeared into the fog. No barking, no running. Just a quiet, lonely walk like a shadow carrying a secret. I sat there staring at the screen. I couldn't explain it, the tight, aching feeling blooming in my chest. Not fear, not pity exactly. Something older, softer, like recognizing a forgotten part of myself in that fragile silhouette. Eleanor came up behind me and rested her hand on my shoulder. "Show me." I rewound the clip. We watched it together in silence. When the footage froze on the last frame, she whispered, "He wasn't stealing, he was holding on to something." Her voice trembled slightly. I turned toward the window. The fog was still thick around the fence. A few sparrows landed and darted away. I thought of Max, our old dog. He used to carry off slippers and scarves, hiding them under his bed like treasures. I'd laughed back then. But looking at that little Doberman, I couldn't laugh at all. That afternoon, I carried the other shoe out to the porch and set it beside the missing one's place. Eleanor looked at me and smiled. "What are you doing?" I half grinned. "If he comes back, I want to see which one he picks." We went to bed early that night, but I couldn't sleep. Around 5, I slipped out of bed and peeked through the curtain. The porch glowed pale under the light, the wood slick with mist. And then a shadow slid across it. He had come back. The little Doberman. I froze, hand pressed to my chest. He sniffed the shoes one by one, his tail tucked, low ears drooping. Then he chose Eleanor's shoe. He didn't bite or drag. He lifted it gently, almost reverently, and vanished again into the drifting white. That image stayed with me. A tiny creature alone in the cold, carrying away something that didn't belong to him, but doing it with the careful grace of someone who understood what warmth meant. At dawn, Eleanor brewed coffee. She didn't ask questions, just said quietly, "So, what do we do now?" I looked toward the fog-draped woods. "Follow him," I said, "tomorrow morning." She nodded. No smile, no protest. Just a slow, knowing nod, the kind of gesture only people who've lived long enough can make. The kind that says sometimes a small mystery is all it takes to lead us back to the part of our hearts that still remembers how to feel. And maybe I thought I wasn't really looking for a shoe at all. Maybe I was looking for that part of myself, the one that still knew how to care for no reason at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound echoing like footsteps pacing inside my head. Beside me, Eleanor lay still, her breathing soft and steady. Yet I knew she wasn't asleep either. Her hand clutched the edge of the blanket as if holding onto a thought she wasn't ready to let go. I stared at the faint glow of the porch light leaking through the window blinds. Outside, the fog was thick white as smoke. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, just a stray dog, nothing more. But the look in its eyes when it carried the shoe, that haunted me. It wasn't the gaze of hunger. It was the gaze of a small creature doing something with purpose for a reason only it understood. By morning, Eleanor was fixing breakfast. "I'm setting up another camera," I said firmly by the fence line. She didn't ask why. She just poured more coffee, her voice warm and calm. "If it comes back, don't scare it off." I smiled faintly. "I just want to know where it's taking the shoes." That evening, I placed 2 pairs of old shoes on the porch, one mine, one Eleanor's, right where the others had been. I adjusted the camera angle, then sat by the window with the porch light off. Only the faint amber from the living room spilled across the damp wood. The wind sighed through the pines, creaking softly like someone whispering just out of reach. Near dawn. 4:49 a.m. A sound faint but distinct. I held my breath and looked outside. From the edge of the yard a small shadow emerged, wet, thin, trembling. He had come back. The little Doberman. I didn't look through the monitor this time. I was there watching him with my own eyes. He moved carefully, tail tucked, ears drooping, each breath steaming in the cold mist. Slow, deliberate, unafraid of the silence. When he reached the porch, he paused and sniffed each shoe in turn. That's when I saw it. He was already carrying something in his mouth. A small blue shoe. A child's shoe. I froze. It wasn't ours. Where could it have come from? And why a child's shoe? The puppy set it down gently on the porch like leaving an offering. Then he turned, picked up Eleanor's slipper with his front teeth. Before leaving, he stopped and lifted his head. His eyes met mine through the glass. Just one look. No fear. No panic. Only quiet recognition. Then he turned away, disappearing once more into the fog, fading like breath into wind. I stood there for a long time, my heartbeat heavy, slow, my throat tightened. Not because of the slipper, but because I knew I had just witnessed something sacred. Something fragile enough that words might break it if I spoke. The next morning, Eleanor called me outside. She'd found tiny paw prints in the mud near the fence, winding uneven, leading toward the woods. "See that?" she said softly. "He's carrying them that way." I knelt down. The prints were small, not in straight lines. Some dragged as if he'd been hauling something heavier than himself. A mix of curiosity and worry rose in me. "Eleanor." I said tomorrow morning we'll follow him. She looked at me, half surprised, half tender. "How far do you plan to go? Far enough to see where he's going." That evening, I sat on the porch lacing my boots. On the table beside me was the little blue shoe he had left behind. It was caked with mud, smelling faintly of earth. I didn't wash it. I just stared at it. Across from me, Eleanor held a cup of tea, her gaze distant. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Maybe he's not just taking shoes. Maybe he's carrying something we've forgotten, the instinct to keep someone warm." I looked at her, then at the shoe. Something inside me stirred tender and aching, like a half-remembered song. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. As dusk fell, Eleanor laid her hand on my shoulder. "If you go tomorrow," she said, "I'm going with you." I nodded. No words. Between us hung a strange silence, not heavy, just still, like the quiet between two heartbeats. I gazed toward the woods. The grass swayed, the fog coiled like tired breath. Somewhere out there a small creature was walking through the cold, carrying our shoes one by one into the dark. And somehow I knew it was leading us to a place most people no longer have the patience to see. That night I dreamed I was walking barefoot through the fog. Ahead of me, the little Doberman turned his head, eyes glowing softly, a look that was both question and invitation. I followed, and in the dream, I too was holding a small blue shoe. The next morning, before the fog had lifted, Eleanor and I began following the tiny paw prints left from the night before. The air was damp, rich, with the cold scent of soil. It felt like stepping out of the world we knew and into something older, quieter. The path behind our house, where I'd spent years strolling to watch squirrels, now looked different, darker, deeper, as if hiding a secret. Eleanor walked just behind me, her wool scarf swaying gently with the wind. We didn't speak, only the soft crunch of dry leaves beneath our feet and the steady rhythm of our hearts filled the silence. The muddy prints were faint, small, and round, and between them were thin dragging lines like the marks of something being pulled along the ground. I knelt and touched one of the prints. Still damp, which meant it had passed not long ago. Around us, pine branches swayed under the weight of dew. Moss carpeted the ground and light filtered through the trees like drifting silver smoke. The air smelled of iron and sap, the scent of raw forest cold and untouched. We walked deeper. With every step, the sounds of the civilized world faded away. No traffic, no wind chimes from the porch, only the woods, our breath, and the feeling that unseen eyes were watching from between the trees. Eleanor whispered, "Do you hear that I stopped listening?" A faint sound, something scratching lightly at the base of a tree. Then silence. We exchanged a glance. I motioned for quiet. Slowly, I stepped toward the sound, careful not to break the stillness. My shoes were slick with dew, each step creaking softly against the damp wood. Around a bend in the path, I saw something lying on the ground. My shoe. The missing one. It rested on a moss-covered rock, soaked through a few leaves clinging to the laces. I crouched to pick it up. The fabric was cold to the touch, but just as my fingers brushed it, a weak bark echoed behind me, rough and strained, almost like a whimper. I turned. Through the mist, the little Doberman appeared. Smaller than I remembered. Its body, gaunt fur, slick and muddy, hind leg limping slightly. In its mouth, another shoe, the same small blue child's shoe. Its eyes, round and amber under the pale light, locked onto mine. It didn't bark again, didn't run, just stood there watching. For a few seconds, no one moved. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then it stepped forward slow and deliberate and placed the blue shoe on the ground, toe facing me. The gesture was careful, almost reverent. I swallowed hard, my voice low, afraid to break the fragile silence. "Hey there, little one." Eleanor's hand touched my arm. "Don't move closer," she murmured. "Let it decide." We stayed still, while the puppy sniffed the shoe, then turned ears. Drooping eyes, flicking toward the woods a silent message. "Follow me." Then it turned away, slipping between the wet trees. I looked at Eleanor. She nodded. We followed. The path sloped downward, the mud slick beneath our shoes. It didn't run, just kept a steady pace, pausing now and then to look back as if making sure we hadn't fallen behind. And every time its eyes met mine, I felt it, that strange reversal. I wasn't the one leading. I was being led. We walked for nearly half an hour. The air grew thicker, heavier, the light dimming under the canopy. Just when I thought we'd lost it, a faint, golden shimmer flickered through the dying branches ahead. There, beneath a fallen oak, was a shallow hollow carpeted with leaves and moss. The puppy crouched low and disappeared inside the dark opening. A faint whine followed. Eleanor's breath hitched. "Jack, you hear that?" I nodded. We moved closer slowly until we stood at the edge of the hollow. It was pitch black inside, but something shifted. A tiny movement, a shiver, then a sound soft as the sigh of something clinging to life. Cold seeped into my bones, but my heart pounded hard, not from fear, but from knowing. For 3 nights, I'd only felt it in my gut. Now it was real. The puppy wasn't alone. It was guarding something or someone in that darkness. I crouched lower, trying to see. Eleanor caught my hand. "Wait," she whispered. "Let it come to us." And just then the little Doberman lifted its head from the shadows. Its eyes caught a sliver of morning light trembling alive. It looked straight at us, chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. And in that wordless gaze I heard it clearly. If you want to understand, come closer. We didn't know what we were about to find, only that in that hushed forest beneath the faint breath of something fragile and alive, there was a power greater than fear, the kind of love that could make a starving puppy stay behind in the freezing dark, just to keep another heartbeat alive. I knelt down, my heartbeat pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Inside the hollow of the fallen tree, dark, cold, damp, something stirred. I leaned lower, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. And then I saw them. Tiny shapes. Trembling. Curled into a pile of leaves. One puppy. Then another and another. 3 in total. So small they could have fit in the palms of my hands. Their fur was soaked, their skin so thin I could see the faint rise and fall of their breathing beneath it. No mother nearby. Only the little Doberman we'd been following standing guard at the mouth of the hollow like a tiny shield. Eleanor gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Jack! Oh my God! I couldn't speak. Every part of me froze. The small dog lowered its head, gently licking each puppy, nudging them with its nose to make sure they were still alive. It trembled, but didn't move from its spot, its frail body blocking most of the entrance, shielding them from the cold wind. When the breeze swept through it, hunched lower, pressing its body against the tiny ones, wrapping them in what little warmth it had. Light slipped through the trees, catching on its wet black coat, turning it gold for a moment. I couldn't look away. I knew instantly those puppies weren't their own. It was far too young to have any. And yet, it was here in the freezing forest, refusing to leave, refusing to save itself, all to keep them alive one more day. Around the hollow, half buried in leaves and roots, I saw what it had gathered: shoes, sandals, torn bits of cloth, old sneakers, children's slippers, even a single wool sock, all carried from somewhere, stacked carefully around the nest like a small fortress. Intentional, protective. It had built a home out of the things the world had thrown away. And suddenly, everything made sense. The missing shoes, the drag marks in the mud. Those nights it returned again and again. It hadn't been stealing. It had been building. My throat tightened. I'd spent my life as a carpenter, crafting roofs and walls, believing I understood what it meant to build a home. But I had never seen anything built with such pure compassion. Eleanor knelt beside me, her voice breaking. Jack, she's being a mother. I nodded slowly, afraid to even breathe. Yeah, I whispered, a child, who already knows how to love like one. The young Doberman looked up at us. Her eyes weren't fearful, nor defensive, just deep questioning, as if asking, will you hurt them? I slowly raised both hands, palms open, showing her peace. A cold gust swept through the trees. She shivered. Eleanor loosened the wool scarf around her neck and gently laid it near the hollow. The dog glanced at it, then turned back to the weakest pup, licking its face, patient and deliberate. Now and then she exhaled, exhausted, but she never stopped. Eleanor's shoulders trembled. She turned to me, voice thick with grief. Someone abandoned these babies, and she's the only one who stayed. I placed a hand on her shoulder. No words came. I thought back to the rainy mornings in my old workshop, when I was younger, believing the world was held together by strong joints and clean cuts. But here in this cold hollow, I realized it's held together by something else, entirely invisible threads of instinct and love. The little dog finally lay down. She pulled herself close to the puppies, her body wrapping around them, her eyes heavy. Tired, hungry, freezing, but still she stayed. As her breathing merged with the wind, I could hear a rhythm, faint but steady, the rhythm of life. Eleanor whispered, No one ever taught her how to be a mother, but she still knows. I looked down, fists clenched, my voice rough. Some lessons don't need to be taught, I said quietly. You just need a heart. In that moment, I understood. Love has no age, no reason, and sometimes it comes from a creature you never expected could teach you anything at all. I lifted my eyes toward the silent forest. The afternoon light was falling in golden shards through the branches. On the damp ground, the little Doberman lay motionless, her tail twitching faintly each time the wind passed. In a vast and indifferent world, she had chosen to stay to protect 3 fragile lives. And somehow I knew, from that moment on, we wouldn't leave until she and her little ones were safe. I've seen many kinds of courage in my life, but never one this quiet. A puppy who could barely stand, taking on the role that not even every grown human has the strength to bear. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. All I knew was that the wind kept getting colder, and inside that hollow tree the breaths of those tiny bodies were growing weaker. Eleanor placed her hand on my shoulder, her voice trembling. Jack, if we don't do something, they won't make it through the night. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the little Doberman. She was drenched, trembling, barely standing, yet her eyes were still open, watchful, fiercely protective. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "Hey, little one, how about letting us help?" She didn't move, just looked, that look deep, scared, conflicted, like she was caught between running away and daring to trust. I took the dry wool scarf from my pocket and laid it a few steps from the nest. Then I backed away slowly, keeping my movements small, my body quiet. Eleanor knelt beside me, holding her breath. The dog stared at us for a long time. Then she lowered her head, licked, the weakest pup lifted her nose to the air, and finally, very softly, crawled toward the scarf. She gripped it gently with her teeth and pulled it closer. I could hear the faint scraping of her claws against the damp earth. When she spread the scarf beside the nest, a tiny whimper escaped her, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She was trying to keep doing what her body no longer had the strength to do. I glanced at Eleanor. She nodded once. Now Jack. It has to be now. I moved forward, slow and low, my knees sinking into the wet leaves. The little dog tensed her ears up, her body stiff as wire. I stopped and whispered, "It's okay. I won't hurt them." My voice shook not from the cold, but from something pressing against my chest, hard and deep. I reached out inch by inch until my fingers brushed the edge of the warm scarf. The Doberman didn't growl, didn't bark. She just breathed hard, then lowered her ears, a small surrender. But it broke me. I bent closer and wrapped the first puppy in the scarf. Its skin was cold, its heartbeat faint. Eleanor opened her coat and tucked the tiny body inside, layering another scarf to keep it warm. We worked one by one. Each time I pulled my hands away, the Doberman crept closer, licking each pup's face as if whispering, "It's okay." By the last one, she could barely stand. Her legs gave out and she slumped beside the hollow, wheezing. I looked at her, her fur matted with mud, claws worn raw, her body shaking. I knew she'd been awake for nights, fighting to keep them alive. I couldn't leave her there. I opened my coat, knelt down, and murmured, "Come on, sweetheart, let's go home." She didn't move. I placed a hand on her neck. Her heartbeat was faint beneath the soaked fur. Eleanor crouched beside me, pulling a strip of dried meat from her pocket. She set it near the dog's muzzle. A breath, then a weak lick. Just once, but it was enough. I lifted her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing, the kind of light that comes from being too close to the edge. Eleanor walked ahead, cradling the 3 tiny pups in her scarf. We left the forest as dusk settled in. Behind us, the hollow remained open, empty now, except for the pile of old shoes she'd used to build her shelter. At the tree line, I looked down. The little Doberman's eyes were half open, her breathing shallow but steady. She no longer resisted, no longer feared. She just rested her head against my chest, listening to the heartbeat of a stranger she'd chosen to trust. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You've done enough." Eleanor turned back to look at me. Through the thick mist, her eyes shimmered. Her voice came out soft, almost reverent. "We've spent so many years believing animals need people, but maybe it's people who need them to remember we still have hearts." I nodded, holding the trembling body close. She shivered once, then went still. Her breath mingled with mine. And there, in the quiet hum of the Blue Ridge woods, I made a silent promise that she would never spend another night alone again. 3 weeks later, my backyard was alive with the sound of barking again. Not loud or wild, but light, bright notes ringing through the golden hush of afternoon. 4 little souls, 3 puppies, and their not-quite-grown mother tumbled and played on the grass where the sunlight poured down like honey. The young Doberman had made a full recovery. Her black and tan coat gleamed. Her eyes sparkled no trace of the cold nights she had survived. She was still small, but her steps carried confidence now. Eleanor said she had the look of someone who's lived 2 lives, one ruled by fear, and the second by faith. Every morning, when I opened the porch door, she came running, carrying one of my old slippers in her mouth as always. But now she didn't try to hide it. She placed it carefully by my foot, looked up tail, swaying gently as if to say, "Keep it for me. I don't need it anymore." The 3 little ones had grown round and clumsy, each about the size of Eleanor's cast-iron pot. They darted around my legs, tripping over each other, tumbling into the soft grass, their short ears flopping tails wagging like ribbons in the light. Each time one fell, the young Doberman rushed over, licking their faces, whimpering softly, patient protective a mother in every sense. Sometimes the neighbors stopped by. They still told the missing shoe story, a small legend in our quiet street. And they laughed warmly when they saw the creature who had once shivered in the forest now sleeping in a wool blanket by the fireplace. No one asked why anymore. They just knew that somewhere between hunger and fear, she had learned love and taught us the same in return. This evening, the sun lingered a little longer than usual. Light stretched across the porch, painting Eleanor's face in gold as she sat knitting. I sat beside her, cup of tea in hand, the Doberman resting her head on my leg. Her breathing was steady, soft, peaceful. I looked out toward the woods where mist drifted between the old oaks. I thought of that night, her eyes in the rain, the shoes piled around the nest, her instinct to love something that wasn't even her own. Something inside me had shifted since then. Maybe it was faith, that fragile thing we think we've lost, like an old shoe just waiting to be found again. I stroked her head, whispered, "Thank you, little one. You taught me how to love again." She opened her eyes, looked up at me, and pressed her head into my palm. A breeze swept across the porch. My old slipper lay quietly beside us. No longer a clue in a mystery, but proof of a small miracle that kindness doesn't need words to be understood. If you've made it this far, thank you truly. Not everyone takes the time to listen to a story about a small creature, an old shoe, and a quiet miracle between humans and animals. But if you're still here, maybe your heart is a little like mine, still believing that goodness hasn't vanished from this world. That little Doberman never spoke a word, but her actions said everything. That love needs no reason, and the instinct to protect something smaller than yourself is the most sacred thing any being can possess. I still think about that cold night, the way she looked at me before letting me carry her. That look taught me something. Sometimes trust is the greatest gift we can ever be given. If you've ever rescued a dog, a cat, or any trembling soul that needed a second chance, tell your story in the comments. because maybe your story will help someone out there believe again in kindness in life and in the quiet miracle of love. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit like, share, and subscribe so we can keep spreading what's left of the goodness in this world. Thank you for taking the time to listen to a voiceless puppy, and for letting your heart, even just once, slow down long enough to hear what we all forget sometimes: that compassion is still alive all around us every single day. Because one day, you might be the person a small creature chooses to trust just by looking into your eyes.